Okay, today we're going to continue using our inheritance rules and what we know about fertilization to help us understand why we have some interesting offspring patterns. So far we've spent some time thinking about how some traits are dominant, but yesterday we talked about how each parent can give one allele to their offspring through meiosis and how that fertilization can let us see some recessive traits that show up later on that aren't in either parent. So we saw that with our little albino girl, but we're still thinking about why in the F2 generation do we have this 3-to-1 ratio. So again, if we revisit our little albino girl, we were thinking yesterday about how come she is albino when neither of her parents are albino, even though her grandma is albino. But now I want to add to that question, how likely is it that we can get an albino little girl from two parents that are not albino? So if you remember yesterday, we spent some time with our cell models, and you figured out that it is possible to get a little albino girl from two parents that are not albino, and you built a model that used our rules showing that half her genetic material came from each of her parents, and that there are sometimes alleles that are recessive, meaning they don't show up in the parents. So if each parent has a recessive allele and they pass it on to their offspring, then the child can have a trait that neither one of their parents have. So now today we're going to think about, okay, we know that this can happen, but how likely is it that something like this will happen? Well, sometimes it's easier to talk about our model organisms than it is to talk about humans. So we're going to spend more time today talking about our pea plants and our geckos than humans. So what if instead I asked you, how likely is it that I will get a blizzard gecko from two parents who are not blizzard, who have normal coloring? So we're going to begin by zooming in to the molecular level. You can go ahead and look at activity 3.3a in your activities packet. And you'll see a diagram like this reminding us that we have geckos, and inside those geckos there are cells, and inside those cells there's a nucleus. If you zoom in even further, inside that nucleus there are pairs of chromosomes, and on those chromosomes are genes, and those genes might have different alleles, maybe a functional allele or a non-functional allele. And those chromosomes and those genes are made up of DNA. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at picture A on activity 3.3a and say to yourself, how can I use this information to describe what's happening at the cellular level when geckos mate and produce offspring? And so you're looking at this picture right here, and you're going to go ahead and try to make sense of it and write your thoughts down. Pause me and turn me back on when you've finished. Okay. Hopefully at this point you have spent some time trying to make sense of this picture, zooming in at the molecular level. And I hope when you were making sense of this picture, you started thinking about some of our rules. I hope at some point you thought about the fact that one gene can be dominant over another, and that's the trait that will be expressed, and how each parent gives half their genes to their offspring through meiosis, and how genes from two parents are combined through fertilization, and how these gametes, these eggs and sperm, can come together randomly in fertilization. This word randomly is going to become very important moving forward. So if we're again looking at this picture, we've got two parents, and those parents are each making gametes that have half the genetic material, and those are coming together randomly in fertilization to make our offspring. So now I want you to look at another picture. Flip your page in your activities packet. And I want you to think about this picture B. And I want you to review again our inheritance rules. How does this picture illustrate those inheritance rules? Pause me and jot down your ideas and come back to me when you're ready. Okay, so as you can see, we have one parent who has two non-functional alleles and another parent who has functional alleles, two functional alleles. Each of those parents produce eggs or sperm. This egg or sperm has half the genetic material. Those eggs and sperm come together, and now we show a fertilized egg that has the full amount of genetic material. And I hope you notice here that you have a functional allele and a non-functional allele, recognizing that assuming our functional allele is dominant, that this offspring might exhibit the dominant trait. It might show up as being having the normal coloring, even though one of its parents has two non-functional alleles and would be considered blizzard. So there's some questions on activity 3.3a. It asks, how many alleles does each organism get for each gene? I hope you notice that this organism right here got two alleles for this one gene. So 1, 2, 2 alleles. But how many alleles came from the mother and how many alleles came from the father? Well, this gecko got this one allele from its mother and this one allele from its father. Now it asks about which alleles that each gecko offspring could inherit. Well, this gecko offspring could only have inherited this non-functional white allele from the mom because that's all she had to give, and could only inherit this functional allele from its dad because that's all the dad had to give. All right, so we've spent some time looking at some diagrams of our geckos, and that's going to be helpful in a few minutes when I have you practice this a little bit. But I want us to circle back to the way we're going to represent this. We're going to use models to represent what's going on in these kind of complicated pictures. And there are three kinds of models that we can use. One of them is called an egg-sperm table. This is going to show you the different kinds of egg and sperm that a parent can produce. One of them is called a pedigree. That's sort of like a family tree. And one of them is called a Punnett square. And you're going to practice this in activity 3.3c. And there is another video that shows you exactly how to use these with our geckos. But for now, I just want to have you look at all three and realize that these are multiple representations of the same thing. So these are all representations of how this works. And the middle one, pedigree, has some interesting information because there's more circles and squares here. So knowing that circles represent a female and squares represent a male. And when they get married, there's a line connecting in between. And underneath them, these are their kids. And it looks like they had a daughter and 3 sons. Now we color in or don't color in these to indicate whether or not they have a trait, and we will always have a key over here. So whether it's a female or a male, if it's a colored in, it's going to be considered a normal gecko. Whether it's a female or a male, if it's not colored in, we're calling it blizzard according to this key. So right here, one of their children is a male that's blizzard. But neither of its parents are blizzards. Pause me and think about how that can happen. How can we get a blizzard child from 2 parents that are not blizzard? Okay, at this point, You've probably thought about the fact that this parent each had to have a non-functional allele to give to this blizzard. So both of these parents had to have been either heterozygous or hybrid to have this blizzard offspring. It also tells us that blizzard must be a recessive trait. If the trait doesn't show up in either one of the parents, but it shows up in their offspring, we know that must be recessive, because that allele must be able to be hidden in here somewhere where we can't quite see it. This is then going to be the recessive trait. So pedigrees can be super helpful for us in thinking about helping us organize what's going on in a family. Two other helpful models are the egg-sperm chart and the Punnett square. And we can use that to help us answer this question: where does our 3-to-1 ratio come from? In this F1 generation, how is it that when we take two of these hybrids or heterozygotes that we always seem to see 75% of the offspring have the dominant trait and 25% of the offspring have the recessive trait? We've been asking that same question since the beginning of our unit. Well, let's go ahead and build an egg-sperm table and a Punnett square to help us figure that out. So first of all, in your egg-sperm table, you have to figure out the genotype of the female parent. So we're going to pretend that this purple one is our female parent. And we're going to, instead of using the squares, and we're going to use some letters. We're going to use a big A to represent this female parent right here, and this little a to represent this male parent here. But they're going to have some kids, and all of their kids are going to be this F1 generation, big A, little a. We know that this parent only has a big A to give, and this parent only has a little a to give, which means all of the offspring in the F1 generation are going to be big A, little a. One dominant allele and one recessive allele. But what if we take two kids from this generation and cross them? All right, so now we're going to say a female from this generation is going to be a big A, little a, and a male from this generation is going to be a big A, little a. All right, this is how an egg-sperm table works. You say, all right, I know that this female parent can either make a big A egg or a little A egg. I know that this male parent can only make a big A sperm or a little a sperm. And now I say to myself, wow, how many different kinds of combinations can I make between these eggs and these sperm? I know that this big A and this big A can come together. And I know that this big A and this little a can come together. And I know that this little a can go with that big A, and this little a can go with this little a. We can represent that using a Punnett square. So we know the one parent can give either a big A or a little a. So this parent can get either that or that. We know the other parent can give either a big A or a little a. We bring them together. We say this big A and this big A come together, and we have two big A's through fertilization of eggs and sperm. We know that this big A and this little a from this parent can come together through fertilization to make a big A, little a. We know that this parent can give a big A and this parent can give a little a to become, through fertilization, we can get this, and we know this one can give a little a and this one can give a little a. So now I see in front of me all the possible combinations from two parents that are big A, little a. And I notice something right there. I notice that we can get that if we look, this is going to look purple. These two are also going to look purple. In fact, out of the four possible combinations, 3 of them are going to look purple. So here is why we see this pattern where in all likelihood, 3/4 of our offspring will be purple, while 1/4 of them will look white. Now again, this is due to these are random events. So we might not, each time we won't, each pair of plants will not just have 4 offspring. They might have 5, but every single time they have a new baby, they have a 3/4 of a chance of it being purple and a 1/4 of a chance of it being white. You have some opportunities to practice this using activity 3.3c. There is a video of me showing you how to do the very first problem. Go ahead and watch that video and practice this using your geckos and activity 3.3c. Thank you.